welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited for today's video. I'm going to be starting another new series on my channel that is palette focused, and today is going to be my monthly palette recap. So in 2021 I wanted to focus more of my content on like eyeshadow palettes, etc., just because I personally love eyeshadow palettes and love eyeshadow palette content. It's what I get super excited to film. But then I just brought a bunch of eyeshadow palettes into my collection and didn't even necessarily like really include a lot more eyeshadow palette content on my channel. So this year, as I started to think through my content and like my monthly series, I was trying to figure out what I could do like with my eyeshadow palette collection, etc. So I have two new series in regards to eyeshadow palettes that I'm going to be doing on my channel. One of them I posted last week, which was my February palette stash, and I will be doing a monthly palette stash style of video where I pull some palettes out of my collection that I want to focus on for that month. So my February palette stash is obviously very like pink and purple and like romantic focus. I'll leave that I'll leave that video linked down below, as well as my eyeshadow palette playlist in case you're interested in seeing more content like that. And today I'm going to be recapping all of the palettes that I used throughout the month of January with you, and I will continue to do that every single month. I also do a quarterly palette recap on my channel, which I've been doing for 2 years now. And it's a video I get excited to film every single quarter, where I go through my palette collection and talk to you about like my most used palettes for the quarter, etc. So it's going to be very, very similar to that, but it's just going to be talking about the previous month. And I thought this would be a good way for me to kind of just assess my own use of my palette collection, etc. So obviously I have my monthly palette stash videos that will be starting now, that I'll have those focus palettes. But for the month of January, I was really kind of focused on eyeshadow palettes that I really did not use in 2021. I posted a video about all the unused eyeshadow palettes from my collection 2021. So I wanted to get some use out of those palettes, as well as some of my palettes that are going on my Palettes on Their Last Two Raw series. All of these will be linked down below. But my Palettes on Their Last Two Raw is basically like a chopping block style of eyeshadow series on my channel. So I really was focused on those, as well as my palettes from my Pan Those Eyeshadows series. And as I like look through my data, which we will get into, there were only there was only 5 eyeshadow palettes that I used more than one time, which is crazy. So I'm really excited as the months go on to kind of compare months to months and things like that. I'm a huge stats and like data nerd. Like stats was like one of my favorite classes I took ever. So I'm very excited about this. I hope that you guys are. As always, I would love your feedback in the comments below on just things you would like to see me include in this series, maybe that I don't include in this video but you would like to see going forward. Let a girl know. Other than that, if you're interested in seeing the palettes that I used throughout the month of January, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I would love if you consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. All right, you guys, so through the month of January, I did my makeup only 11 times, which is much improved compared to the last 3 months of 2021, but I used to do my makeup a lot more than that, and I'm hoping to do my makeup more than 11 times in February. But in those 11 times that I did my makeup, I used a total of 26 eyeshadow palettes. And for me, a use in an eyeshadow palette means that I just reached into the eyeshadow palette for at least one eyeshadow shade. So it could be that I only reached in for like a lid setting shade or just one shade, but I reached into the palette at least one time for one shade, if that makes sense. Like I said, I only have 5 eyeshadow palettes that I reached for more than twice this month, meaning that I have 21 eyeshadow palettes throughout my collection that I only reached for one time. So I'm gonna go through from least used to most used. So I'll then have 21 eyeshadow palettes to share with you right now that only got used one time, and then I'll share with you obviously the palettes that got touched and used more than once. I forgot to mention, I'll also take this time, if I got new eyeshadow palettes the previous month that I have been testing out, to kind of give a brief overview and thought on those palettes. But I did not have any new eyeshadow palettes that I purchased throughout the month of January. I did have the Patrick Top palette, which I purchased at the end of December and didn't start using until January. I used that 2 times, so we'll get into that eyeshadow palette, but I just wanted to briefly mention I'll also go through any new eyeshadow palettes that I purchased in this video. So let's start with this stack right here. These were all eyeshadow palettes that are either going in my palettes on their last 2 raw series or palettes that I did not reach for at all in 2021. So up first, I have my Natasha Denona Lila palette. This is my first Natasha Denona palette that I purchased, and it is getting older in my collection, so I do want to focus on this palette and get more use out of it this year, just in case some of the shades start to go bad or just don't perform as well. I find this palette, for some reason I struggle to reach for this, I think because I know it's so expensive, and I do that thing where I feel like I have to reserve it for special occasions, but I really want to focus on not doing that this year. And I love this bottom row of shimmer like lid shades, and I'm just excited. Hopefully we'll see some more use out of the Lila this year than we did last year. I also have my ABH Amrezy palette, which I didn't reach for at all last year, so I used this one time, and hopefully we'll continue to reach into this a bit more. My Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette, I don't believe I reached for it all in 2021, and I created a full look using the Latte palette, and I told myself I'm gonna create a look with this, see if it's like a palette I want to keep, or see if it's, because obviously this is kind of like a dupable palette. I feel like I likely have these shades throughout palettes in my collection. I do love the shimmer shades in the Dominique Cosmetics formula. I think that they're really beautiful and really high impact, but for the most part I felt like this was a pretty dupable palette. But when I used it again, I forgot how easy the formula is to work with, and I actually really enjoyed the look that I created. I also have just been opting for more neutral looks the last year or so, so even though I can dupe this palette in my collection, I also feel like I could easily get a lot of use out of this palette and can easily create a look using just this palette, whereas some palettes I feel like I can't create a full look out of that palette just the way that my mind works. So this is a palette I will be keeping, and I was really happy with the way that my look turned out. Also, my Huda Beauty Smoky Obsessions palette is a favorite of mine, but a palette that I found for some reason I wasn't reaching for the last like year and a half, so I reached for that one time. My Kaleidos Futurism Pink palette I reached into. I mentioned in my palettes that I didn't use last year that I really wanted to reach in and create a look with this beautiful lilac shade, and I did do just that. This is a palette that these 3 shades I find to be actually pretty wearable, so hopefully I can get myself to use that one a little bit more this year. And then also my Marc Jacobs Electric palette is a palette that I didn't use last year and is also in my palettes on their last 2 raw series. I'm actually focusing on this for my Pan Those eyeshadows. If you missed my update for February, this is a spoiler, this is a palette that I will be working on in that project, so hopefully that will also give me some more motivation to reach for this a little bit more. All right, more palettes that I reached for one time. I have my M Cosmetics Divine Skies eyeshadow palette. I got this, I want to say, for Black Friday, and used it a couple of times towards the end of 2021, and want to continue to reach for this. This is a palette that I'm focused on for February. My Sugar Pill Bite Size palette is going in my whole collection project pan, and I did reach into a few of the shades and reached into this palette one time for like one look, if you will, and this is again going in a project, so you'll likely be seeing this again next month, at least if I'm doing my due diligence to make an effort to work through the projects in my project pan. I also reached into my Natasha Denona Retro palette. This is a really, really beautiful palette, and I did not give this enough love when I first purchased that last year. My Alter Ego Canyon palette is going in my Pan Those eyeshadow series. I did only reach for this one time, but anticipate I will be reaching into it quite a bit more, hopefully this month. The Trace Luce palette, the IM palette, is another palette that's going in my Pan Those eyeshadows series. I'm working on this blue shade. I reached into that shade one time last month. My ColourPop Limoncello palette. This was a favorite palette of mine from 2021, and I was just inspired to reach for this again as I pulled out all of the palettes that I was including in my 21 favorites from 2021. I was like, ooh, I want to reach into this palette again. So I grabbed for that once. The Lawless, the Glam One eyeshadow palette, I purchased during the Sephora VIB sale in November and reached for it a few times last year, but really enjoy this one. I love this pink shimmer shade, so I actually used this again today to create, what did I use? Oh yeah, I used this matte shade, just one shade in this palette today, but I did reach into this again today. And then also my Huda Beauty Wild Tiger palette. I just was feeling really inspired to reach for this and want to continue to reach for this as well. This is a palette that I'm like itching to get use out of, so I anticipate you'll see this one again in February. All right, and then I have my final stack of palettes that got one use. Another Kaleidos palette. This is the Sashimi City palette. I do love this eyeshadow palette, and this is one I kind of want to focus on all throughout the year and just see if I can potentially like unofficially try and pan some of the shades in this palette. I just think it's a very universally flattering palette. It's very wearable, very easy to create looks with. So hopefully you'll see that one. It'll be interesting. I'll include in my upcoming updates like repeat palettes. So if there are palettes that, you know, we continue to see month after month, I'll kind of shout those out as well. Obviously this is the first month and the first update, so we'll kind of get our bearings, but like I said in the introduction, if you have things that you want to see from this series, let me know in the comments. Also the Tiny Marvels palette I reached for one time, and this is a palette I was really enjoying reaching for at the end of 2021. I was reaching into this a lot. I use this in my brows as a brow powder quite frequently. I'm using a different shade from a different palette right now that I'm trying to pan, but I have a feeling you will be seeing this palette quite a bit in 2022 as well. Also my Viseart Soleil palette, this I have a feeling you'll see a lot, just because as I think through like everyday work looks, this is a palette that I continue to want to reach for, and I loved the look that I created with this yet again. Every time I reach into this palette, I'm reminded how much I actually really enjoy this, so I grabbed for that one time my Sigma Enchanted palette. I thought this was just so beautiful, especially for this time of year, and I hadn't reached into this in quite some time. I reached for this just the other day, and I have a feeling I will be reaching into this a couple more times throughout the month of February, because I really enjoyed the look that I did with this palette and started to get ideas for other looks that I wanted to create with this palette as well. I did a pink look the other day. I've been very into like pink and purple looks, but I want to play around with the greens and this like blue brown shade as well, so keep an eye out. I have a feeling you'll see that one in February as well. And then also my Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. I reached for this one time, and this is another palette I really want to keep front and center and focus on this year. I always talk about how much I love this palette, but this is another palette that I find myself feeling like I have to reserve for special occasions, and this is another one getting older in my collection, so I want to focus on this one this year. I think I miscounted and I had 20 palettes that I used one time or more, and then I have 6 palettes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, my math is always wrong, but I still love doing math. Now we'll get into the palettes that I used more than one time. So these two next palettes I've used twice. First is the Patrick Ta Major Dimension palette. Again, I purchased this in December and just got around to testing it for the first time in January. I have not yet used the cream shadows on my eyes. Other than that, I believe I've used, with the exception of this brown shade, this sort of like matte with shimmer, it's like a satin shade, these two, as well as this shade right here, I have yet to reach for, and then I need to test out the cream shades as well. So I've used maybe about half this palette. I did really enjoy the look that I created using this palette. I thought that the mattes were really easy to work with. The shimmers they're a little bit chunkier, and the texture is a little bit different than I guess I'm normally used to working with, but I still really enjoy the palette. I think it's really beautiful. I know this is an expensive palette, but so many people had been raving about this for so long. I definitely wanted to get my hands on this and feel like this could be like my go-to travel palette, just because I feel like obviously it's neutrals, but you can really go like super soft with this, and then you can go like full glam as well. So I'm excited to continue to play around with that palette. And then the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. I purchased this during the Sephora VIB sale and used this a few times in November and December of last year, and then was very excited to continue to play with it this year. I still have so many ideas in mind for looks that I want to create, so I have a feeling you'll be seeing this palette again in February. I think this is really beautiful again for like February and like pinks and purples. The shimmer shades and the just like unique shades in this palette are just so stunning and unique in my opinion. Swatching them, I like literally have drool dripping out of my mouth. So I cannot wait to continue to play with this palette. I feel like I've heard mixed reviews on this one, but I personally have really enjoyed my time with the Huda Rose Quartz. Sorry, I read my sheet wrong. I have a third palette that I reached for twice, and that is my ColourPop Pisces in the Sky Quad. This is going in my Pan Those Eyeshadow series. I am currently working on this shade right here. It's a really easy one and done, just in my crease shade, or if I want to do if I do like this in my crease and then tap this all over my lids and do like sort of like a soft astral, is that even the right way to use that word? If I try and do something like that, I love the way that that has turned out. I used this shade again today, and I feel like it's gonna take me forever to hit pan on this because I used a ton of the shade, I feel like, and it looks like almost untouched. I also really love this shade. I think it's beautiful. I really enjoy this quad. I think that the ColourPop quads are really nice. Moving into the next palette, this palette I used 3 times throughout the month of January. This is the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, and I actually do have an eyeshadow pan in this palette. Normally I'll share any pans that I hit the previous month at the beginning. I sort of forgot to do that. Normally we'll include that at the beginning, but my one eyeshadow pan that I hit in the month of January is this shade right here. This is in the shade Whipped Cream, and I obviously have a pan there. I was working on this in my Roulette Pan collab, and then I just totally fell off that project just because my life was too chaotic. I wasn't doing my makeup and I really didn't have progress to share, but I circled back to make sure I was able to hit pan on this shade. I will eventually come back to this palette. I actually really do enjoy this eyeshadow palette, but I have others that I want to focus on right now, but I am very excited to have added a new eyeshadow pan to my collection. All right, my second most used eyeshadow palette from the month of January was the Nabla Secret palette. This is a palette that I am working on in my Palettes on Their Last Hurrah. This is a palette that I thought I really liked but just never reached for, so I wanted to decide if I wanted to keep this one. I was working on this shade right here in my Pan Those Eyeshadows, and then I reached into this shade quite a bit. And when I say quite a bit, I reached into this palette 5 times throughout the month of January, but I did reach for this shade right here each time that I reached into this palette. I was using this as a brow powder, and I actually really enjoyed this shade as well when I was doing like a neutral look and just wanted to add a little something to the outer corner. I do want to keep this palette front of mind and maybe create like a pink look for Valentine's Day with these shades, and then also play around with this shade right here as well as these 3 shades right here. I also really used to enjoy, so I still have a lot of work and a lot of things I want to do with this eyeshadow palette, and I'm glad that I made sure to at least start to reach for this because I actually like have continued to want to reach into this palette. So again, I have a feeling you'll be seeing that one in the month of February, or for my February recap. And then my most used eyeshadow palette from January was my ColourPop Little Ray of Sunshine palette. This is also going in my Pan Those Eyeshadows. I'm working on this shade right here for that series, but I've been reaching into the lid setting shade as well. After I hit pan on the Too Faced shade, I wanted to move on to my next lid setting shade. I do like to just try and cycle through my lid setting shades and hit pan on them. It's kind of like a way to like cheat the system, if you will, and still feel motivated and like I'm hitting pan on eyeshadow. So I reached into this palette 6 total times, and I have a feeling I'll have more than 6 uses in February. I will continue to reach into this as my lid setting shade, and then I'm obviously working to hit pan on this as well. So that is it. Those are the palettes that I used throughout the course of the month of January, my most used as well as like my least used, even though I had 20 that I used the same amount. Let me know what you're interested in seeing from this series. Normally I'll include any eyeshadow pans that I hit, mini reviews on any new eyeshadow palettes that I purchased, and then obviously my use on everything. And I'll start to compare like months, and we can get into like which eyeshadow palettes are repeats. Like maybe there'll be an eyeshadow palette that, you know, you see every single month, and we'll talk about things like that. But I hope that you guys enjoyed. I know I'm super excited about this series. I hope that you are too. Thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.